In the last 5 years, research from bodies like the Pew Research Center documented something unprecedented. For the first time in modern history, a significant portion of young men is declaring themselves single by their own choice. Not for lack of interest in relationships, but due to a conscious evaluation of costs and benefits. What changed in the social dynamic that led to this silent withdrawal? The mathematics of modern relationships reveals a deep contradiction. Data from the U.S. Census Bureau show that less than 10% of American men earn above $100,000 a year. Less than 1% surpasses the range of $400,000 to $500,000 annually. At the same time, viral content on social networks establishes exactly this range as the minimum acceptable standard for serious relationships. The math simply does not add up. When 9 out of 10 men do not meet the financial criteria publicly declared as basic, what happens to the relationship market? Classic studies by David Buss, replicated in dozens of countries over 3 decades, show a consistent pattern. Women tend to value income and socioeconomic status in potential partners significantly more than men do. This is not a moral judgment, but a documented behavioral observation. The problem arises when these evolutionarily understandable preferences meet expectations that are economically impossible for the majority of the population. It is interesting to note how technology amplified these natural dynamics to a breaking point. Dating apps created a market where attention is concentrated in an extremely unequal manner. Research on platforms like Tinder reveals that a small percentage of men receive the majority of matches, while the vast majority experience rejection rates close to 95%. For many men, this digital experience translates into something close to what economists call a yes market with coordination failure. They invest time, emotional energy, and financial resources, but the expected return rarely materializes. Reports from the same Pew Research Center indicate that young men report levels of loneliness and resignation from dating much higher than those of women of the same age group. The question is not whether these men deserve romantic attention. That would be a moral question irrelevant to the analysis. The question is to understand how distorted incentives create behaviors that frustrate all parties involved. If this type of analysis regarding modern relationships makes sense to you, it is worth subscribing to the channel to follow more investigations into contemporary social dynamics. The phenomenon of perceived value inflation deserves special attention. Social networks like Instagram and TikTok created an illusion of abundance. Women receive hundreds or thousands of online interactions and may interpret this as a reflection of their value in the relationship market. But there is a crucial difference between digital attention and real commitment. Many of the men who like photos or send messages on social networks would never offer a serious relationship or genuine emotional investment. They are interested in momentary validation, casual fun, or just visual satisfaction. This discrepancy creates a dangerous distortion. Women may develop expectations based on signals that do not reflect real intentions. On the male side, this generates a perception that the market is artificially inflated. Men with serious intentions observe women rejecting compatible partners in favor of options that frequently are not available for long-term commitment. It is curious to observe how this dynamic mirrors classic economic bubbles. An asset, in this case romantic attention, has its price artificially raised by factors that do not reflect its real demand in the serious relationship market. The Instagramization of affection adds another layer of complexity. Relationships have become public performances. Romantic dinners need to be photographed, trips need to be documented, gifts need to be displayed. Research published in the Journal of Consumer Research associates excessive focus on status and consumption with lower relational satisfaction and more instrumental bonds. For many men, this constant pressure for material performance becomes unsustainable, not just because of the financial issue, but because of what it reveals about the nature of the bond. When relationships become personal marketing projects, genuine intimacy takes a backseat. Behavioral economics data suggests that individuals tend to abandon systems when they perceive that costs consistently outweigh expected benefits. This is not about hate or resentment. It is about rational analysis of incentives. the issue of marriage introduces even more complex variables. Official statistics from Western countries show that between 40 and 50% of marriages end in divorce. The majority of these divorces are initiated by women, according to longitudinal studies widely documented in sociological literature. Again, this is not a judgment on who is right or wrong, but for men evaluating marriage as a financial and emotional decision, these numbers represent a significant risk. In no-fault divorce systems, the costs of a separation can include alimony, division of assets, and, in many cases, limited access to children. It is natural that many men opt for cohabitation or informal commitments, avoiding the legal contract that can become financially devastating. Have you observed how these dynamics affect the relationships around you? Is the pressure for material performance and status changing the way people connect emotionally? The result of these combined forces is what sociologists are starting to call silent male withdrawal. It is not an organized movement or a political statement. It is a behavioral adaptation to incentives that many men perceive as unfavorable or unfair. Millions of men are simply exiting the game. Some invest in careers, hobbies, or family bonds. Others dedicate themselves to casual relationships without expectation of commitment. A growing portion chooses almost complete social isolation. This phenomenon raises an uncomfortable question. When a critical mass of men abandons the traditional relationship market, does this indicate a problem with the men themselves or with the rules of the game? The male withdrawal from the relationship market did not happen overnight. Behind the numbers and statistics exists a deep emotional transformation that deserves careful analysis. To understand why so many men are making this choice, it is necessary to examine not only the external incentives, but the psychological processes that lead to this decision. Research in social psychology reveals that repeated experiences of rejection create avoidance patterns that can become permanent. When someone invests emotionally in dozens of interactions that result in frustration, the brain develops negative associations with the very act of trying. This is not weakness, it is a psychological protection mechanism documented in multiple areas of human experience. For many young men, dating apps have become machines of systematic rejection. They spend weeks creating careful profiles, invest time in conversations that do not evolve, spend money on dates that do not generate connection. After months or years of this dynamic, some simply stop trying. What is interesting is that this withdrawal frequently coincides with other investments. Men who abandon active dating often redirect energy toward careers, physical exercise, hobbies, or personal development. It is not depression or giving up on life. It is a reorganization of priorities based on a practical evaluation of where effort generates return. It is fascinating to observe how this behavioral change mirrors basic economic principles. When a market offers low-quality products at high prices, rational consumers seek alternatives or simply exit the market. In the romantic context, many men perceive that the product available, relationships with high financial maintenance and low emotional reciprocity, does not justify the necessary investment. The role of social networks in this dynamic goes beyond simple distortion of expectations. Platforms like Instagram and TikTok created a culture where relationships are measured by performance metrics. How many likes the couple receives, how expensive the birthday gift was, what the destination of the next trip is. This transforms partnership into competition and intimacy into marketing. Studies on conspicuous consumption show that when relationships become vehicles of social status, emotional satisfaction tends to decrease. Couples focused on impressing external audiences frequently neglect the construction of genuine bonds. For many men, this constant pressure for material performance becomes not only expensive but emotionally empty. The issue of maintenance costs deserves special analysis. Viral content that establishes specific monthly values to maintain a woman reflects an explicit commodification of affection. When relationships are described in terms of mandatory financial investment, this inevitably changes the nature of the connection. It is understandable that many men question, If the IDYASA value of a relationship is measured primarily by monthly spending, what is the difference between this and a commercial transaction? This question does not arise from misogyny, but from legitimate confusion about where the emotional and affective component of the partnership lies. Have you noticed how the language surrounding relationships has changed in recent years? Terms like invest in me, my standards, and my value suggest a transactional approach that may be driving away people interested in genuine connection. Male anxiety regarding marriage has roots that go beyond divorce statistics. Research shows that many men feel they have lost influence in decisions that affect their own marital lives. In a culture where happy wife, happy life has become popular wisdom, some men report feeling that their emotional needs have become secondary. This does not mean that women do not deserve to have their needs met. But healthy relationships require balance, and when one of the parties feels they are constantly giving without receiving emotional reciprocity, dissatisfaction is inevitable. The issue of legal incentives adds a layer of complexity that many men consider when evaluating marriage. In legal systems where the division of assets is independent of who accumulated them, where alimony can last for decades, and where access to children can be limited, marriage can seem like a financially risky contract. It is crucial to understand that this perception does not necessarily reflect the complete legal reality, but rather how many men interpret the risks based on reports that circulate socially. Perception is reality when it comes to personal decisions, and male perception regarding matrimonial risk has changed drastically. The silent withdrawal can also be seen as a form of passive protest. When men exit the relationship market, they are implicitly signaling that current conditions do not meet their emotional or practical needs. This is not hate, it is self-preservation. It is notable how this dynamic creates a cycle that can harm all parties. Women who maintain very high expectations may end up rejecting compatible partners, while men with potential for healthy relationships withdraw preventively. The result is lonely people on both sides, but for different reasons. The solution does not involve blaming individuals, but recognizing that distorted incentives produce dysfunctional behaviors. When dating apps profit from romantic frustration, when influencers monetize affective insecurity, when legal systems create perceptions of asymmetric risk, the very concept of romantic partnership becomes compromised. Research on emotional well-being consistently shows that healthy relationships are one of the main predictors of long-term happiness. Both men and women benefit from stable connections, mutual support, and genuine intimacy. The tragedy of the current situation is that systems created to facilitate these bonds may be inadvertently sabotaging them. The central question is not whether men or women are right or wrong in their expectations. It is understanding how to create conditions where both sexes can form satisfactory partnerships without feeling they are being exploited or misunderstood. Some men are finding alternatives. International relationships where cultural expectations may be different. Communities focused on personal development, where connections form around shared values. Or simply deep friendships and chosen families that offer emotional support without the complexities of modern romance. What does this suggest about the future of relationships? Perhaps we are seeing the birth of new partnership models where commitments are more flexible, where expectations are negotiated explicitly, where the focus is on real emotional compatibility instead of social performance. Can you imagine what a relationship system that worked better for all people involved would look like? What changes would be necessary for men and women to feel genuinely valued and understood? The male withdrawal from traditional relationships does not need to be permanent. But as long as current incentives remain, it is possible that more men will choose to invest their emotional energy in areas where they feel they can prosper without excessive risk. The final question is not whether this trend is good or bad, but what it reveals about the systems that shape our effective lives. When millions of people make the same individual choice, this ceases to be a personal matter and becomes a social phenomenon that deserves serious attention. Perhaps the first step to resolving this impasse is to recognize that all parties, men and women, have legitimate needs that deserve to be met. From this foundation of mutual respect, new forms of partnership may emerge.